Your computer is not broken, your files are fine. But as of October 13th, 2026, the last day of Microsoft's Extended Security Updates program, your Windows 10 machine will stop receiving security patches permanently. That is the exact problem this video solves. Not should you switch to Linux someday, but what you actually do step by step before that deadline hits. Whether you have a machine that can't run Windows 11 or you're just tired of the direction Microsoft is heading, this is your complete migration playbook. Here's what matters most. You don't need to be a developer. You don't need to know what a terminal is. The Linux distributions we're going to look at today are designed specifically for people coming from Windows, and most of them will feel familiar within an hour. In this video, we're going to answer 3 questions. First, what actually happens to your machine after October 13? And is it really that serious? Second, which Linux distribution is the right fit for your situation? And third, how do you actually make the switch without losing your files or your sanity? By the end, you'll have a clear, actionable plan. Let's get into it. Let's be precise about what end of support actually means, because there's a lot of confusion around this. Windows 10's mainstream support ended on October 14th, 2025. At that point, Microsoft stopped adding new features, and they stopped providing free technical support. But security patches, those continued. The updates that protect you from malware, ransomware, and exploits, those continued through the ESU program. That stands for Extended Security Updates. For consumers, Microsoft made that program free for 1 year. So if you enrolled, you've been getting security patches for free through October 13th, 2026. After that date, the program ends entirely. No more patches, not even for critical vulnerabilities. Now, your machine won't suddenly stop working on October 14th. Windows 10 will still boot. But here's the practical reality. Every vulnerability discovered after that date will be a permanent hole, an unpatched hole in your system. And attackers know exactly when that date is. If you're using that machine to browse the web, check email, or do online banking, and let's be honest, most of us are, running an unpatched operating system is a genuine security risk. Not a theoretical one, a real one. So the question isn't whether you should do something, the question is what you should do. And that's where it gets interesting, because you have more options than Microsoft wants you to think. The obvious answer to Windows 10 end of life is just upgrade to Windows 11. And for a lot of people, that is a perfectly valid path. But there is a catch, and it is a significant one. Windows 11 requires a hardware security feature called TPM 2.0, Trusted Platform Module version 2. It also requires a supported CPU generation, 8th Gen Intel or later, or AMD Ryzen 2000 series or later. If your machine is older than roughly 2018, there is a good chance it does not meet those requirements. Now, Microsoft did loosen some of these requirements in late 2025. You can technically install Windows 11 on unsupported hardware with a registry workaround. But there's a catch to that too. Microsoft explicitly warns that those machines may not receive future updates. And they get a persistent watermark on the desktop. It is not a clean solution. Here is the scale of this problem. As of late 2025 estimates suggested that somewhere between 240 million and 500 million PCs were running Windows 10 on hardware that could not officially upgrade to Windows 11. That is a staggering number of machines. Perfectly functional computers that Microsoft's upgrade path effectively leaves behind. And this is exactly where Linux becomes relevant, because Linux does not have those hardware requirements. A machine that Microsoft considers obsolete can run a modern, fully supported Linux distribution, often faster and more smoothly than it ran Windows 10. So let us talk about which Linux distribution is actually right for someone coming from Windows. There are hundreds of Linux distributions out there, and if you have ever tried to research this, you have probably been overwhelmed by the options. So let me cut through that and give you the 3 that actually make sense for someone coming from Windows. Linux Mint is the one I recommend most often for Windows migrants. And there's a reason it is consistently one of the most downloaded distributions in the world. The Cinnamon desktop environment looks and behaves a lot like Windows 7 or Windows 10. You have the taskbar at the bottom, start menu in the corner, and system tray on the right. If you sit someone down in front of Linux Mint without telling them what it is, many of them will not immediately realize they are not on Windows. It is built on Ubuntu, which means it has access to a massive software library. It is stable, well maintained, and the Mint team is very conservative about updates. They do not push things to users until they are thoroughly tested. For someone who just wants their computer to work without surprises, Mint is the right choice. Zorin OS is the second option, and it is specifically designed for Windows switchers. It has a feature called Zorin Appearance that lets you switch the desktop layout between Windows style, macOS style, and a few others with a single click. It is visually polished, probably the most visually polished of the three. And it also includes a compatibility layer that makes it easier to run some Windows software. The free version of Zorin OS is excellent. There's also a paid Pro version with additional desktop layouts and pre-installed software, but you absolutely do not need it to get started. Ubuntu is the third option, and it is the one with the largest community and the most corporate backing. It is made by a company called Canonical. The GNOME desktop it ships with is more modern looking and works a bit differently from Windows. So there is slightly more of a learning curve, but Ubuntu has the widest hardware support, the most tutorials online, and if you ever run into a problem, there's almost certainly a solution already documented somewhere. My honest recommendation, if you are not sure, start with Linux Mint. It is the path of least resistance. And you can always switch later once you are more comfortable with how Linux works. Before you download anything, before you create a bootable USB, before you do anything else, back up your data. This is a step that people skip, and it is a step that causes regret. Here's what you need to back up and where to put it. Documents, photos, and videos. These are your most important files. Copy them to an external hard drive, a USB drive, or a cloud service like Google Drive, OneDrive, or Dropbox. If you use OneDrive, make sure your files are actually downloaded locally and not just stored in the cloud. Check that the sync is complete before you proceed. Browser bookmarks and passwords. Export your bookmarks from Chrome, Edge, or Firefox. For passwords, if you are using a browser-based password manager, export them to a CSV file and store it somewhere safe. Better yet, this is a good moment to switch to a proper password manager, like Bitwarden, which is free, open source, and works perfectly on Linux. Email. If you use a web-based email service like Gmail or Outlook.com, you do not need to do anything. It will work exactly the same in a browser on Linux. If you use a desktop email client like Outlook or Thunderbird, you will want to export your local mail folders. Application settings and data. Think about which applications you use daily and whether they have any local data you would lose. Games with local save files, accounting software, anything like that. Make a list and check each one. Once you have done all of that, and I mean actually done it, not just thought about it, you are ready to move to the next step. And this is where it gets interesting, because you have a choice to make about how you want to approach the transition. You have two approaches to installing Linux. The first is dual booting, keeping Windows on your machine alongside Linux and choosing which one to start when you turn on the computer. The second is a full replacement, wiping Windows entirely and installing Linux as your only operating system. Dual booting is the safer starting point if you are not sure yet. You get to try Linux in real daily use with your actual files and workflows while still having Windows as a fallback. The downside is that it is slightly more complex to set up and it splits your storage between two systems. Full replacement is cleaner and gives Linux the full resources of your machine. If you have done your backup properly and you are reasonably confident you want to make the switch, this is the approach that gives you the best Linux experience. There is no going back without reinstalling Windows from scratch. But honestly, most people who go this route do not want to go back. My suggestion: if your machine has a single drive with less than 500 gigabytes, do a full replacement. If you have a larger drive or a second drive, dual boot for a month, use Linux as your primary system, and then decide. By the way, I just checked our channel analytics and it turns out about 89% of you watching right now are not subscribed yet. If you have been getting value from these Linux deep dives, hitting that subscribe button is the best free way to support the channel and make sure you never miss the next one. Now, let us actually walk through the installation. I will show you exactly how to create a bootable USB and get Linux onto your machine. The installation process is more straightforward than most people expect. Here is the full walkthrough. Step 1. Download the ISO. Go to linuxmint.com or zorino.com or ubuntu.com, depending on which distribution you chose. Download the ISO file. For Linux Mint, choose the Cinnamon edition. It is the most Windows-like and the one I would recommend for beginners. Step 2. Create a bootable USB. You will need a USB drive with at least 8 GB of storage. Download a free tool called Rufus. It is a small Windows application that writes the ISO to the USB drive. Open Rufus, select your USB drive, select the ISO file you downloaded and click Start. It takes a few minutes. Step 3. Boot from the USB. Restart your computer and press the key that opens your boot menu. This is usually F12, F2 or delete, depending on your machine's manufacturer. Select the USB drive from the list. Your computer will boot into a live Linux environment. You can actually try Linux without installing anything at this point, which is a great way to check that everything works. Step 4. Run the installer. When you are ready to install, double-click the Install Linux Mint icon on the desktop. The installer will walk you through language, keyboard layout, and then the disk setup. If you are doing a full replacement, choose Erase Disk and install Linux Mint. If you are dual booting, choose Install alongside Windows. Step 5. Set up your user account. The installer will ask for your name, a username, and a password. Fill those in, click through, and the installation will complete in about 10 to 20 minutes, depending on your hardware. When it is done, remove the USB drive and restart. That is it. You are running Linux. But now comes the part that actually matters, making it work for your daily life. The biggest concern most people have about switching to Linux is software. Will my applications work? The honest answer is, it depends on what you use. Let me walk through the most common categories. Web browsing, this is a non-issue. Firefox, Chrome and Brave all have native Linux versions. Whatever browser you use on Windows, you can use the same one on Linux. Office software, LibreOffice, comes pre-installed on Linux Mint and Zorin OS. It handles Word, Excel and PowerPoint files reasonably well for most everyday use. If you need deeper Microsoft 365 compatibility, the web version works perfectly in any Linux browser. And if you are looking for a dedicated alternative, OnlyOffice and WPS Office both have Linux versions with strong compatibility. Email. Thunderbird is the standard desktop email client on Linux, and it is excellent. If you use Gmail or Outlook.com, the web interface works identically to Windows. Photo editing. GIMP is the open source alternative to Photoshop. It is powerful, but has a steeper learning curve. For basic photo editing, Shotwell or Gthumb are simpler options. If you are a professional Photoshop user, this is one area where Linux has genuine limitations. Video calls, Zoom, Microsoft Teams and Google Meet all have Linux clients or work through the browser. This is not a problem in 2026. The software library on Linux is genuinely good for most everyday computing tasks. Password managers, Bitwarden, 1Password and KeePassXC all have Linux versions. You will be just fine. Where it gets complicated is in a few specific professional areas. And that is worth being honest about. I want to be straight with you here, because I think the Linux community sometimes oversells the platform to people who then get frustrated when reality doesn't match the pitch. Adobe Creative Cloud, Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, After Effects. None of these have native Linux versions. You can run some of them through a compatibility layer called Wine, or through a virtual machine. But it's not seamless and it's not officially supported. If your work depends on Adobe software, Linux is not a straightforward replacement. This is a genuine limitation. Gaming. The situation here is much better than it used to be, thanks to Valve's Proton compatibility layer and the Steam Deck. The majority of Steam games now work on Linux. But there are exceptions. Games with aggressive anti-cheat systems, like some popular multiplayer titles, still don't work reliably. If you're a serious gamer, check ProtonDB. It's a community database that tells you exactly which games work and how well. Specialist professional software. CAD tools like AutoCAD, accounting software like Sage or QuickBooks, and some industry-specific applications either don't have Linux versions or have limited alternatives. If you rely on any of these, research your specific software before committing to a full switch. Hardware compatibility. Most modern hardware works well on Linux. Printers, webcams, external drives, generally fine. The area that still occasionally causes issues is NVIDIA graphics cards. The open source Nouveau driver works, but for gaming or GPU accelerated workloads, you'll want the proprietary NVIDIA driver, which Linux Mint and Ubuntu make reasonably easy to install. None of these limitations are deal breakers for most people, but I'd rather you know about them up front than discover them after you've wiped your drive. Earlier I mentioned there was one option that might surprise you. Here it is. If you have a machine that's genuinely old, we're talking 8, 10, even 12 years old, Linux doesn't just give it a new operating system, it often gives it a noticeably better experience than it had running Windows 10. This because Linux distributions designed for older hardware are exceptionally efficient. Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop runs well on machines with 4 GB of RAM and a dual-core processor from 2012. If you have something even older or lower spec, there are distributions like Linux Lite or MX Linux that are specifically optimized for that kind of hardware. I've personally seen machines that were practically unusable on Windows 10, taking 5 minutes to boot, struggling to open a browser, run Linux Mint, and become genuinely usable daily computers again. Not fast by modern standards, but perfectly functional for web browsing, email, and document work. This matters for a practical reason. Instead of buying a new computer because Microsoft says your old one is obsolete, you can extend the useful life of that hardware by several years. That's better for your wallet and, frankly, better for the environment. The hardware Microsoft considers end of life is not actually end of life. It's just end of life for Windows. Linux doesn't see it that way. Now let's talk about what happens after you. Let me set realistic expectations for your first week, because the experience varies a lot depending on your background. Day 1 is usually fine. The desktop looks familiar enough, you can open a browser, check email, and do basic tasks without any issues. Linux Mint in particular is designed to be immediately usable out of the box. Days 2 and 3 are often when you hit your first friction point. You will try to do something specific, like install a piece of software, change a setting, or connect a device. And it will not work exactly the way you expect. This is normal. The way you install software on Linux is different from Windows. Instead of downloading an exe file from a website, you use a package manager. Think of it like an app store built into the operating system. Linux Mint has a software manager with a graphical interface that works very similarly to the Microsoft Store, just with a much better selection of free software. Days 4 through 7. By this point, most people have found their rhythm. The things that felt unfamiliar start to feel normal. You have figured out where your settings are, you've installed the software you need, and the system is running smoothly. The terminal, the command line, is something you will hear about a lot in Linux circles. And yes, it is a powerful tool. But for everyday use on Linux Mint or Zorin OS, you genuinely do not need it. Most things can be done through graphical interfaces. If you do need to use it occasionally, the commands are simple and well documented. And there are always people in the Linux community willing to help. Speaking of community, this is one of Linux's genuine strengths. The Linux Mint forums, the Zorin OS forums, and communities like the Linux subreddit are full of helpful people. They were exactly where you are now and are happy to help. You are not doing this alone. Let's bring this together into a clear action plan, because I want you to leave this video knowing exactly what to do next. Step 1. Back up your data. Documents, photos, videos, browser bookmarks, passwords. Do this today, not when you're about to install. Step 2. Choose your distribution. If you want the most Windows-like experience, go with Linux Mint Cinnamon. If you want the most visually polished option, try Zorin OS. If you want the largest community and widest hardware support, Ubuntu is your choice. Step 3. Download the ISO and create a bootable USB using Rufus. Boot from it and try Linux Live before you install anything. Make sure your hardware works, especially your Wi-Fi and display. Step 4. Install. Choose dual boot if you want a safety net, or full replacement if you're ready to commit. The installer is straightforward and very easy to follow. Step 5. Set up your applications. Install your browser of choice, LibreOffice or an alternative, your email client, and anything else you need. Use the software manager. Don't download random exe files from the internet, because those don't work on Linux anyway. The October 13th deadline gives you time to do this properly. Don't wait until the last week. Start the process now, while you still have Windows available as a reference point. If you found this useful, please like the video. It genuinely helps other people in the same situation find it. And subscribe to tondoeslinux and more, so you don't miss the follow-up content we have coming on Linux setup, software recommendations, and more. And if you want to support the channel directly and get some cool perks, consider clicking the join button below to become a pseudo user or get root access. It means a lot and it helps keep this content coming. Thanks for watching and supporting the channel. I'll see you in the next one.